Welcome to episode number 3 of This Moment We're In, the show that explores how teams are navigating AI-driven change in real time. From messy experiments and breakthrough solutions to thought-provoking ideas about how roles, collaboration, and talent are being reimagined. I'm Cindy Chastain, and today I'm talking with Greg Petroff, a design and innovation leader who has spent his entire career in large organizations, including GE, SAP, and Cisco, helping teams translate new capabilities into products, systems, and ways of working. What makes his perspective especially relevant right now is that he's not just observing how AI is changing software development, he's working with teams as those structures begin to shift in real time. We tend to hear a lot about how AI is making software development faster, but what Greg is seeing inside teams suggests something more fundamental. The ways in which products get built is starting to change and possibly dissolve. And when that happens, what might new ways of working look like? This conversation is really about a potential future, what AI tools mean for how teams think, collaborate, and make decisions when the old map no longer applies. So, let's get into it. Hey, Greg.
Hi, Cindy. How are you today?
I am fabulous. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Me too. I can't wait to talk about what you've been learning and how that's starting to shape some really interesting ideas about how this moment we're in requires thinking about product development in entirely new ways.
Yeah, it's definitely a different era that we're entering. That's for sure.
Yeah. Tell me about it. Now, before we jump in, I'd like our listeners to better understand the work you're currently doing. You've held several chief design officer roles in your career, and you were one of the first people from the design community I can think of who landed the role of a chief experience officer at GE back when it was a fairly new idea. How would you describe this phase of your career?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of like being in transition. I'm, working for myself now. I don't see the need to run large teams. At the same time, it's such a fascinating moment to see how the tools are working. And I'm really interested in sort of disrupting myself and sharing what I'm learning. And so I guess what I would say is I'm doing fractional work and finding it really valuable and rewarding. And it's kind of the right pace for me at this moment.
Yeah, I love the idea of disrupting oneself. What's also really cool is that when you do fractional work, you can do fractional for more than one company.
Yeah.
And I think that's really given you the opportunity to see different things happening simultaneously, which is really rare. And in our conversations, in fact, you shared 2 contrasting stories about what you experienced as a fractional chief design officer for 2 companies. And I'd love to talk about those stories and then spend some time with how those experiences informed your thinking about how the product development lifecycle is changing for the better and, when it's not working so well. And in the first story you shared, you were working with a design-strapped product team.
Yeah.
That's about a year into adopting AI tools, but mostly at the margins, you were saying. And the shape of the work is relatively unchanged, but they are moving faster. Can you tell us about that story?
Yeah, I mean, it was a friend of mine from a previous career as the CEO of a fintech startup, and he asked me to come on board. He had a inclination that they were underperforming on the design side or that they were struggling. And it wasn't a reflection of the people. It was just that, things weren't moving as fast as they would like. And in that space, design actually, kind of matters, right? And what was happening was that the designers on the team were basically a service organization, and they would take tickets in from the team, and they would hop in and out of what they were working on, and never context switching every day, meeting with different product leaders all the time, never satisfying anyone, and the work was okay, but it was not intentional or cohesive. So the first thing I had to do was sort of figure out, like, how do I help them scale? Because they're not organized. And, I could go back to the leader and say, hey, you have insufficient design resources. You need to hire a whole bunch more designers so that you can move from a service model to a more squad model. So step one was to sort of understand, like the status quo and where they were. The second level was to start looking at tooling, and they were early on in the AI adoption, although they were doing some things right. The engineering team was, bringing tools in like Cursor, and the product management team was bringing in Linear. And so they were on it, but they were very slow to use them, and sort of sporadic. And the design organization were just so fully baked into what they were operating on in Figma that they just didn't have time to explore other capabilities. One of the things we had to help them recognize is where in the organization were the most important things to be figured out. So that was kind of another piece to it. And so we did this thing that was really fun. It was a workshop that was called "Who Does What, Why, How, and When." And
nice.
And we had we wanted to have engineering, and we didn't. Unfortunately, and my engagement ended before we could do that. But we had product and design in the room, and we talked about how people are using AI, where it wasn't working, where it was working, what opportunities there were. And there were a couple of really interesting things. There was a lot of AI slop in the PRDs that were being written. So, like, just don't send
Surprise.
something. Like, did you read this after you built it? Doesn't make any sense, right? And then there was a part, because resourcing on the design side was a scarce resource. There was a really smart PM on the team who vibe coded part of an experience because she didn't have design support, and she, it was done well. So he's really proud of it. And the PM team's like, look, we can do this now. This is great. And I was sort of endorsing that as a behavior, because I think we are all responsible for delivering great product, and the boundaries are starting to collapse with these tools. But I did sort of ask a question like, how did you do it? And let's unpack that. So we kind of looked at, how long it took her to do the work. And, it took her about a week of, wrangling. But one of the designers on the team looked at the work and said, oh, I could have done that in like 4 hours. And so there was this big aha in the room, which was discernment and skills still matter. And if you're trained as a designer, you can use these tools at a phenomenally fast speed, but faster than your product partners. At the same time, if there isn't capacity, then you should be empowered to do it. So, one of the things one of the outcomes of this workshop was sort of a conversation around a social contract around, is it okay for product to vibe code? And the answer in this particular case was yes, but let design know that you're doing it, and let them have a chance to review it. And then, is it okay for design to have an opinion about like product requirements? Because sometimes they were having to kind of write some of those to give themselves enough direction to do the work. Like they weren't getting clarity from their product partners. And the answer to that was yes. And so I think one of the things that was interesting in that particular group was we were moving away from a PM culture and an engineering culture and a design culture, or a design discipline and a product discipline and engineering discipline, to a product culture that was inclusive of all of those roles, and that the who does what was situational and based on need. And that was completely appropriate and okay given the resourcing that they have.
Right. So situational in the sense that, hey, I'm a PM and there aren't any design resources or people I can work with right now. So I'm going to go ahead and use the tools to do what I need to do, and vice versa, really.
Yeah, and also recognizing where the high priority and low priority, the high touch and
Mm,
low touch parts of the experience were too. And so, we started to talk a little bit about moments that matter and where the scarce resource design should be focusing its attention on in the past.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So, one other question I want to ask for context is, did that organization have a codified sort of approach for developing software? Was it pretty consistent? Everyone knew what they should be doing, when and why,
Mhm.
before actually adopting AI tools?
It sort of transitioned. They elevated someone in the organization to be sort of the interim CPO, and really nice guy, super contemporary on product development processes. So he was just super fun to work with. Like we were really willing to kind of look at how do we get more out of the team? How do we work together? How do we create a culture of um, the product leadership being vulnerable and willing to say they
Mm,
don't know, um, and that collectively design, product, and engineering are going to figure it out together. The organizations I think are more successful are the ones that spend more effort on discovery and are more willing to declare what they know and what they don't know. In a moment where the tools are transitioning and how you may work is not set in stone, just having an open mind to allowing experimentation to happen and then having a place to have a conversation about how might that improve what you're doing is a gift.
it sounds like the conditions were right for developing this
Mhm.
idea of a social contract.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that you had a workshop with the idea of getting to something like that. But what did that actually look like? What did that turn into?
It wasn't like there was tangible artifacts that came out of
Mm,
it. I think it was more peer-to-peer recognition of
hmm
we're on this journey together,
hmm
and that experimentation was okay, and uh, your job wasn't at risk because someone was using a tool that did something that you did, and vice versa.
Yeah.
I think that was the most important piece was, like we're not trying to get rid of design. We're not trying to get rid of product. We're not trying to reduce the headcount in the organization. What we're trying to do is learn how to use these tools, more successfully, and and take advantage of them. To see if they would allow us to improve the quality of the work that the team was working on.
Love that. I think that's something that should be a principle that for every team, because you've heard so many stories of people in that situation where there's a lot of protective behaviors. And in fact, even before the introduction of AI tools, when conflicts would arise across disciplines,
Mhm.
I would find that it would typically be because there was some misunderstanding of who should be doing what,
That for
right?
sure. I think the other thing is the value of what should be done is
Yeah,
also
that
a big
too.
question
Yeah.
too. Like I think design overvalues the value of design. Product undervalues the value of design. Engineering feels like the two of them get in the way of getting the thing done. Like there's this there, the one of the things that's challenging in all organizations is the incentives are usually different, and what we care about is different, and what we measure is different, right? In an organization where um, uh, the metric for success is lines of code, then you're going to write a lot of code, or if the metric is shipping a feature, you're going to ship a lot of features,
Yeah,
right?
right. Which tends to be the case.
You're right. And designers tend to be the quality of the experience, right? Like we want it to be great. And so if you're all in your separate camps around like what you care about, then it becomes difficult when things get hard to align because you're at cross odds with each other in terms of what you think is important.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Um, well, I'm just curious then, just to sort of replay this. You have a team, smaller organization. They had a fair amount of trust built. The conditions were set where they were able to feel comfortable with, crossing into new domains. But the product development process remained somewhat the same. So is it safe to say that they were using the tools, but they were sort of add-ons, accelerants into what essentially remained the
I think
same
that's
way of
where they
working?
were. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, I
yeah.
think, the new leader, I think, is probably in the design side has probably pushed them into, further along that path.
Mm-hmm.
Had I stayed longer, I think the goal was to get them to really do some radical things, like move to the code base being where the design system lived, not in Figma. Moving the way that they, to have a single source of truth for, the intention of like a code first model.
Yeah.
I just think that that's the path that we're headed towards, and it binds you with engineering in a way that makes you, partners together. And they weren't quite there yet when I left, but I think they're most likely on that journey now. So
Yeah. So in this particular story, it sounds like the social contract was successful. They were starting to use these tools. That's probably changed by now, but it was largely incremental in terms of
yeah,
the change that was happening.
yeah.
And you told another story, which I thought was
Mm.
so interesting, with another company,
Mhm.
a small, distributed, and again, early career design team who
Yes.
found itself with an opportunity to contribute to a new product development effort. And it was something they hadn't experienced before. And that was a very different scenario. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that one?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a gig I'm currently working at, and it's a company that has an established product in the market and is recognizing it needs to develop some new things, and to continue growing. And we got the opportunity to do a North Star inside the organization, of a future product direction. And, it's been fascinating because the tooling has changed so radically, even in the last 3 months.
Mm.
And early on in the process of that particular effort, it was this very similar thing. Like, can you do an assessment of the team? But hey, we need you to start this like right away because this is really important for us to get going. You've got to work with the team that, we have. And I'm like, okay, let's get going. And it was interesting because the team is distributed. It sits in, geographically difficult places to have alignment from a time perspective. And so we did a couple of things. One, we found a 2-hour block in our day where we, could be in the same room and it wasn't onerous to either side. And we created, what we called, a design bridge. And it was intended to have, an agenda every day, but also just open time to ask questions and kind of work. I've done these enough times in my career that the process of building a North Star is both, building an artifact that asks a lot of questions that need to be answered, and is visionary enough that people can see the trajectory of where the organization should head to, but may not actually be the thing that you really build.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to deconstruct it to say, here's the first MVP or the first thing that could be built that would be
Sure.
valuable and also wouldn't freak the engineering team out. Right. Because usually, my experience is you show up in the North Star and the engineering leaders look back and go, that'll take us 4 years, like something like that. Like, great vision, but oh my gosh. And so my expectation was, that's my old mental model. And I think this is one of the things that we have to disrupt ourselves and change our prediction framework, because that model, it was the model when things took longer to do, but now we can move so fast
Yeah.
that model doesn't hold up as much anymore. And one of the things we learned in the process of doing this is not only could we move fast, we could insert more things into the process that were hard to argue for under tight time frames. With, that made the product richer. So like when we were in sort of divergent phase, we looked at the information architecture of multiple competitors and deeply understood them very quickly and figured out why they made those decisions. Which is even a level of data. Not 100%, but we through conjecture, we said, we think they're intentionally trying to do this with their customers.
Oh, interesting.
You know,
Yeah.
then we built hybrids of those just because we could. And normally someone would say, well, why are you doing that? And I say, well, the juxtaposition of those things together might inform us in a way that we haven't thought about, you know, and there might be an accident of doing that might surprise us. So we did lots of that, and there were a couple happy accidents in the process of that, where we were informed by, you know, a mashup of something that would have been very difficult and time consuming to do, that really you could do in like a couple of hours, and, you know, boom, you can look at it.
That's
So,
awesome.
yeah, it was really cool. So, so we were able to kind of do that. And then, we vibe coded the whole experience. The teams learned how to do it in the process of doing it. We got lucky. The small team, three people in the design team, they have complementary skills, but they're not 100% the same, which is really useful. And the other thing that's interesting about these tools now is we used to build, you know, North Stars that were semi-functional, but making them rich experiences was painful and time-consuming and expensive. These are like fully fledged and feel like real software, you know? And so,
Of course. Yeah.
you know, and because you can, right? Because these tools allow you to do that right now, right? So now we have been resisting sort of, you know, we're trying to figure out it in a much more systematic way. So we're thinking it as a system. And it's just fascinating to look at also what's happening right now with agentic systems and how people are thinking about experience as a whole in this new space where conversational interfaces are sort of taking over some aspect of the way that we work. And, you know, I think one of the things that we're learning is that all of us are learning this right now. It's really interesting. Like I almost feel like the future organization is less about, you know, like the role of the most successful leader in a design organization may be the IC, not the chief design officer or manager. Like these tools allow people who have discernment and structure and experience and expertise to co-create with a very small team something that's very meaningful.
Right. And what I found was really interesting about this story also is that you were able to do a lot more exploration much faster to get to a North Star, but the outputs for what you were creating actually became inputs to that vision.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We built and they're iterative too, like along the way, right? What are we seeing emerge that people are finding interesting and valuable? What might be a play that we could make that might differentiate the product in the market space that it operates in? Do we want to make that play, or is it important for our customer base that we stay within the vernacular that they're used to? What's the willingness of the organization to push those boundaries, or just play it safe? And here's what it might mean for you, and here's how we might execute against it. Here are some things that you need to think about. You know, make a decision about how to do it.
What I'm hearing is that the things that you created actually enabled a strategic conversation.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
Which is a fantastic way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
You know, I think the hard part is when you're thinking of a North Star, are you really looking at how viable it is? You know, is it feasible? Is it desirable? You're kind of looking at all those lenses so that you're creating something that has a potential for real material value for the company, right?
Yes. I think, the value of a good North Star, and I've communicated that to the folks on the team here is, and by the way, I think we've ended the North Star phase and now we're into like, okay, let's go execute this thing. But the value of a good one is that it provokes questions and it asks you to answer them. And those questions are useful for driving clarity in our organization. And so you have to draw the organization, especially people who've been in the organization a long period of time, into it. And so, part of the tool is to help socialize the reasons why that's important and what we're trying to accomplish together, and then to provide clarity to, folks. And so that's something else to be aware of right now, is that you need to have more stakeholder alignment more often. And you can't just go off in a black box and come back and say, it's, here it is.
Yeah.
The quality of the things that we're building, at some level, obviously these tools allow you to operate in high fidelity. You have to be very careful about them feeling finished when
True.
they're not, and so we have a whole bunch of open questions and people are like, okay, let's go build this. I'm like, whoa, time out. Like, yes, it's very complete, and we haven't, we need to go test some naming conventions, and visual design isn't set in stone, and there's some ordering in some of the experiences that we need to get, design partner or customer feedback or user feedback on to make better decisions on. And those are normal. Those are normal behaviors, but people just feel like, oh, we can just go fast. And it's like, well, we can't forget those things. Like the hygiene of building a good product still matters.
So that reminds me, you had mentioned needing to marinate in outputs rather than making instant decisions. So in a world where tools generate faster than humans can even process, how do you actually build that pause into a team's working rhythm?
Yeah, I don't have easy answers for you on that. I mean, I'm part of our bridge call is to be able to explore. We're going to experiment with something. I was going to do it this week, but I'm going to postpone it to next week. We're going to do a mid-mortem. I don't know if people have heard of post-mortems, but you kind of evaluate a product. And I'm a huge fan of pre-mortems, which is where you get together and brainstorm all the things that could go wrong before you start a project, which we did in this case. We did a pre-mortem with the team, but I feel like we need to do a mid-mortem, which is, are we giving you guys enough time to make good decisions? Are we have we fallen in love with some part of this work too quickly? Or are we feeling like we need more time, but it's actually there? Like, that's the surprising part of it, is like, we might be closer to the truth than we believe, because these tools are too magical for us to believe that they can do the things that they're doing. Right. And so, and I don't know the answer to that. But I want to have a conversation with the team where we can have like a discussion about like how everyone's feeling through this process.
I would love the idea of a mid-mortem, but it also sounds like in this new world, having that be part of the dialogue constantly feels valuable, because it is still new.
It is. And like, what's surprising, what's going on,
So another thing I'm hearing is, in addition to creating a lot of things to facilitate strategic conversations, to be able to explore a variety of scenarios based on other patterns that you're seeing, in the market. And what you've described is essentially this idea of, making to think, not thinking to make necessarily, in the context of AI. And I just love that idea.
I mean, I can't claim I coined that term. A former boss of mine and mentor, Matthew Holloway, coined that when I was at SAP in the design services team. But I do think that designers make to think, and it's not fair, but product leaders think to make. So they write the PRD and then it gets manifested. a design team can often describe the problem and then identify the issues faster through the artifacts that they create.
Mhm.
Um, I think design as a process is also about mediums, right? So if you think about, I'm an architect by original training, and we used to use yellow trace and a pencil, and you can put a trace over a trace and start drawing on top of a drawing, and you might make a mistake, and the mistake informs you, and all of a sudden that is the part of the direction. You can't really explain why you made that choice, but it just seemed like the right thing to do. And then all of a sudden you can kind of reverse engineer, like, why, what happened. And it's a sort of art of juxtaposition that designers are good
Mhm.
at. And,
Yeah.
and I sort of think of like the AI tooling that we're in is another medium. To think of it as a canvas that you work with,
Mhm.
and to understand what it's good at, what it's not good at. You know, if it hallucinates, maybe there's something funny about that or interesting about that, or something that's different about it. I also think designers are good at asking non sequitur questions, or non sequitur prompts that have surprising results. That's that art of juxtaposition. So someone who's very sort of linear in their thinking may ask a set of linear questions, and the designer might, say, I want a daycare center and a sushi restaurant, in the same, what would that look like? Right. And,
Right.
and, and out of that, there might be something that's, you know, makes sense. It's sort of the peanut butter and chocolate makes a Reese's, chocolate bar or Reese's piece.
And you don't know until you dip it in. Yeah.
That's right. And it's delicious, right? So, it's not the only way to make progress in product. That notion of being able to make is a really powerful tool to move fast and to explore. And, I don't think we do enough of it. I think a lot of the product development process has gotten into in the last 10 years has been about, very strategic set of things to do versus taking design skills and just using them towards maybe thinking about strategy or, what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, for sure. I also think that that mental model of
Hmm.
thinking to make can go a long way to steering the way the tools are actually applied more effectively, and the artifacts that are created.
Yeah. Making to think. Yes. Yeah. I think it's
Yeah, yeah,
thinking, but making to think. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's part of where we're in right now. I think the way to understand these tools is to explore them and use them, and it's part of the reason why, this other thing I've been doing with, Jorge Arango is, with Unfinish, this consulting practice that we have together is we're just totally trying to disrupt ourselves, oh, don't do it that way. Just try doing it this way, and it's maybe a bit of a privilege to be able to do that. But I also think the rules of how we do things are changing, and so in an environment where we're in this radical change going on right now, we have to relearn the new rules, and the only way to do that is to get your hands into it and use the tools and be busy making things.
Here's a part that I really can't wait to dig into.
Okay.
The two stories you just shared sit at different ends of a spectrum. So on
Mhm.
one hand, there's this idea of AI as a velocity driver, adding capacity, speed in what is remaining to be somewhat consistent, or had for a while, consistent way of working. And the other as a thinking tool. Both have different implications for the product development lifecycle. But I'd
Mm.
love to probe a little bit more this idea of AI as a design medium, the thinking tool part.
Well, I think it's interesting that you've seen, in the conversation that we've had together, before this podcast and preparing for it, and also, today,
Mm-hmm.
you've heard me talk about what we're up to, and you've seen a pattern that even I haven't really identified, because I'm in the work versus sitting back and kind of looking at it, from the vantage point that you have. But certainly what you're talking about is true. I want to be careful about like declaring that these tools are impacting the decisions in the organization in the way that they are, because I mean, I can
That's
see
fair.
it 100%. But the jury's out. Like, I still want to see like, like how it matures over time, and how much of this makes it to the final outcome. And do people understand its lineage and where it came from? Not that it's important to like give people kudos, but to recognize like, how did we get there? And is there something to learn about how did we get there?
Yeah. Well, I think the questions that you're asking and that are sort of arising out of all this are also just incredibly interesting without knowing what the answers are. But when you think about some of the practical considerations around making to think, another thing you mentioned was this idea of AI brain fog, which
Yeah.
I've personally experienced,
Yeah,
where
sure.
you have teams approving outputs that haven't fully been marinated or interrogated, as you would say. What's the business risk when that becomes a thing? Have you seen that go badly?
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet. I think that for me, brain fog is more about personal health. We can generate really intense content every minute of the day. And um, and then that requires, cognitive energy to consume. And so by the end of the day, you can be pretty fried in a way that is different than maybe the way that we operated before, where there might have been some more grace in your day around having a conversation. There's a kind of set of rituals that we've done historically in product development that get accelerated now, which is exciting. But if you pack too many of those in a day, then maybe by the end of the day, you're not making good decisions anymore because
Sure.
you're tired.
Yeah.
I think we haven't learned yet, like what that ebb and flow needs to be. There's tremendous pressure to move fast, right? And these tools allow you to move very quickly. So I think the reality behind it is we need to create space for discernment. We need to create moments of reflection, so we can chat about where we are in the process, how we're feeling in that moment.
Hmm.
Maybe to raise hey, I'm not sure about this moment. Like, this feels like, a bridge too far, or something we haven't contemplated well, or that we skipped some part of the process that's actually important along the
Hmm.
way because we just jumped over it. So those things I think are important for teams to have constant conversations about. I wrote some documents early on in this particular engagement that were super dense. And I thought I was doing the right thing because it was sort of like really describing in detail the thinking. And, I had a couple of my product peers who were like, these are amazing. And like, I need to go have a cocktail after reading it. Like, it, and so you know, can you give me the
Yeah, yeah,
TLD? Can you
yeah,
give me
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
TLDR?
TLDR.
Right. And I'm like,
Gonna-
okay, that's really important, and this alludes back to the conversation I had earlier, which is like, one of my Achilles heels has been translating the things that we've been doing in a way that others can consume. So I thought I was doing the right thing by building these sort of like,
Yeah.
monster documents because I can
Tomes.
now. And that turned out to be a little bit too much too. So, it's sort of figuring out that. And if super important best practice is to read your stuff, read it,
Yeah. Yeah.
edit it, question it. I think that's a responsibility that you have to, before you send something to someone else, make sure you have, um, at least personally interrogated it a little bit.
Yeah, because I think it's easy to get into a position where you start to trust it a little too much. And
Yeah, it's very easy to trust it. I think it's also, these systems, write so well that you read it and go, wow, okay, this is great, and it's sort
yeah.
of, it is great, except that it's like, 10 degrees off.
So, Greg, if we accept that AI changes not just how fast we work, but how we think, the natural question for leaders becomes, well, what do you actually do with that? How do you make this actionable inside of a real organization
Mhm.
with real constraints, teams that may not be ready for it?
Mhm.
And you've been describing a lot of things that your teams have been doing, but the moves are also around really specific ideas around questioning juxtaposition, almost as design instincts.
Mhm.
Can you talk about those things and then add, are those teachable? Things like non sequitur questioning,
Mhm.
juxtaposition, those are a couple
Mhm.
of key things that you brought up.
Yeah, I mean, some of these come from just design in general, right? If you think about the design
Mm-hmm.
thinking, movement, a lot of people, um, like to throw darts at it because they didn't feel like it delivered, the outcomes that it's proposed to make. But I think there's a couple pieces in that canon that are just straight up from the way designers think about anything, which
Mm-hmm.
is, at the end of the day, there's humans that we're serving, and they have behaviors, and you have to understand them. And then you use the process of design to deliver things which serve those needs, and ideally do it in a way where the humans that you're serving feel seen. The toolkit comes with lots of different things that you can do. And I think we've gotten a little too orthodox around like the delivery of UX, in product and engineering, to understand that in this moment where execution is being commoditized, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we can build software at a tremendously lower cost, with all these tools and bots and things. That the problem that we need to focus on is not how to solve the problem; it's what problem to solve. And so I personally feel like people who have a design background will have more impact over time because we're good at understanding why and what. Um, and and we have a bunch of methods for doing that. I talked about juxtaposition. I'm a big fan of juxtaposition because you take two disparate things and you put them together, and through the exploration of them, something new emerges that no one could have described before. And I would challenge people to ask their favorite, AI non sequitur questions to see what it comes up with, because these are inference engines. You may discover something that it doesn't know or has been undiscovered before by its knowledge base, kind of putting two things together, and it kind of says, here's what they are and here's what they aren't. So that's kind of one exercise I think
I
is useful.
love that.
The other thing I think is really important is constraint framing, right? Designers work better when there's a box.
Mm-hmm.
You might design outside the box, but the box gives you a frame. So, hey, we can only do this, or this is our only capability, or this is what's possible. Um, you should always be challenging that, but those constraints can also give you opportunities for, novel solutions and novel thinking.
I'd like to end with something that you shared with me that you said you weren't sure if you were ready to talk about it. And honestly, I think that's exactly why it belongs here.
Mm.
So I'd love to give you the space to talk about the jobs insight that you had.
Basically, my premise is that the idea of a feature is not the way to think about product development anymore. And really, but at the end of the day, the job it sort of remains. People are trying to accomplish something. There's an outcome that's important to them. And if you can describe that job well, then you can understand how to codify what needs to happen to accomplish that job. And what ends up happening is that, in traditional software, the interface is sort of the actor that enables you to accomplish a task. And right now, I think we're moving into an environment where the actor is actually an intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're moving into a point where we're designing intelligence. And what do I mean by that? It's not only that we can build, complex prompts that enable, the models to predictably answer, a set of questions in a way that makes sense. It's intentionally understanding how that answer should be delivered and what's the shape of that answer, and is that answer text or is that answer UI componentry or small pieces of user experience? It encompasses the prompt, which is, the how do you codify the intelligence? It requires expertise, meaning like, how would a senior person with a lot of experience answer that problem and deliver that outcome? And then it has to think about the grammar of the user experience at a very granular level so that it can arrive in lots of different modalities, whether it's showing up in, as an MCP app or showing up as a pure application, or it's just an interaction pattern and the words that are chosen by, the large language model to communicate to you in a way that makes sense. I think we should be intentional about that. And we could create experience briefs or job briefs that allow us to shape that in a way that's meaningful.
Yeah.
That's kind of the premise of the background of the idea.
I've loved using this idea of jobs to be done, which I think is sort of what it's drawing from, right?
Yeah.
The kind of Clayton Christensen idea. And for those of you in the audience that might be hearing this for the first time, the notion is sort of built around this idea that you hire a product to do something for you, to fulfill a job.
Mm-hmm.
In its simplest form, you're going to hire a drill not to make a hole in the wall. You're going to hire a drill to make a much more beautiful space so you can hang paintings and pictures, right?
Mm-hmm.
And understanding those jobs. And I think that's really, really compelling when you're talking about intelligent interfaces.
It's just, for me, a way of thinking about it that makes sense to me. But I do think internally within organizations, I think, especially in product development, this notion of a feature is no longer, the thing, because people never bought features anyway. They bought outcomes. Features were a way to get to an outcome. But I think the artifact right now is the intelligence that you're designing, and then the delivery mechanism is also in flux. So is our life going to converge on kind of a one of the large models, and those become almost like operating systems for us, or is there space for custom products that recognize and have contextual insight about us that make our lives more easy and more straightforward? But I think at the end of the day, we benefit product teams by understanding it better. And we as design teams have been doing this for a long time. You think about journey mapping. Journey mapping as a tool was a way to understand how a job was getting completed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally.
Right.
I think it's a fantastic way of sort of reframing how we need to think about products, because it's no longer about these deterministic or predictable tasks, right, that a user would undertake. And you have to think about this in a completely different way, which the job supports, because the job itself will always be the same, but how the product delivers on that can always change.
It kind of goes square one back to great research, right? But it's not, it's not A/B testing, and it's not usability research. This is qualitative ethnography. It's going in and understanding the culture of an organization, understanding how people do work, understanding their workarounds, how they hand off work to each other. And by the way, one of the reasons why some AI initiatives are failing is because they ignore the culture of the organization, and they just build a tool and they think everyone's going to gravitate towards it. And they don't recognize that it just doesn't fit people's mental model or how they operate with each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm so glad we had a chance to talk about this one, because I think it's not only an intriguing idea, but it feels so right for the moment, especially as we get into agentic flows and all of that. But going back to this original question around what's happening to product development, and is it dissolving? Is it shifting? Does it depend? I mean, what's your thinking? I'm sure you're still, marinating yourself, but
Yeah.
what are your thoughts?
I think the disciplines still matter. I think, there's no getting away from, you should have people who have, strong design skills and strong product management skills and strong engineering skills. There will be some unicorns who are good at all of them, or two of them. But I don't think it changes the need for folks with those capabilities. I do think it requires a team mindset versus a discipline mindset. So, get over your fiefdom or your discipline area's expertise, roll up your sleeves, and be willing to be very focused on providing tangible, useful results for the customers that you serve in product development. Declare what you know and declare what you don't know. Be fearless and transparent about being in discovery mode or wherever you are in the process, but be willing to declare that collectively as a team you're going to learn how to solve the problem versus like I got it all figured out. I think the tools will allow teams which are curious, and that's the word I was searching for earlier, like empower curiosity.
Yeah.
And then have some rigor about not keeping things open-ended forever, like makes them just have decision points and then live and learn with them. I think these tools do not remove discernment from the equation, but they do remove a lot of the work that we have done in the past. They should allow us to work more on the things that are materially important. So
that's awesome. That's an incredibly insightful list of principles, I think, for people
we'll
to take
see.
away.
That's my hope, right? And my observation is that I think people are landing there. Like they're like, hey, we won't need design anymore because the UI can build itself. And then all of a sudden, boom, they realize, no, you still need to have design in the room. And hey, we won't need engineers anymore because Cloud Code will write all the code. Well, no, it turns out, writing code was only part of the engineer's job, and being strategically thinking about systems and APIs and how things work together is also part of their effort, and we still need them to do that. So.
Yeah. So I have one last question.
Yeah.
That's a lot of great advice for the people who are like on the team. But what's your advice for leaders who are trying to navigate and or make sense of all of these shifts, often organic, in their product development lifecycle as a result of all this?
I would say if you're not in the tools yourself, you're at risk. Because you won't understand how to execute and implement them. Learn from your heaviest adopters, learn who's really going all in and spend time with them. so that you can see what they see. And they may not be able to understand the implications of it across the organization, but you as a leader should be able to leverage those findings to, build clear roadmaps about how you want to grow your team, or how you want to work together with your cross-functional colleagues and peers. Be in an open dialogue with your cross-functional partners around the boundaries of the roles. Be on alert for cross-functional peers who believe that they don't need the other function because these tools, I'm not saying be defensive about it, but have a conversation around this idea of discernment matters, and be self-aware that the ratios and the numbers of people required in these disciplines may change. So we may need less designers, or maybe we need less PM, or maybe we need less engineering. I don't know the answer. It's probably different in every organization based on what problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
Right. But work as a cross-functional team to have that conversation about what's right, not in your silo.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, if you're in an organization that can't do that, then go somewhere else.
Something we should all pay attention to.
Yeah.
Thanks. That was really great. I think we need to put all that in the show notes. There's a lot of value there. But listen, I really enjoyed this conversation, Greg. And I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that you take to these subjects, your curiosity, and also your desire to kind of understand it in a way that puts not only a bit of rigor, but a framework that can be shared and used. And I'm so excited to hear what comes of all the thinking that's emerging from your work as a fractional leader, including the jobs to be done, which really excited me when I heard it. So yeah, thank you so much for your generosity and your time and being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed hanging out with you today. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was fun. What stayed with me from this conversation is this idea that AI isn't just shifting how teams work, it's shifting how teams think. What Greg talked about feels, at least right now, a bit underexplored and possibly more consequential. Working in a way that increases velocity is not the same as disrupting orthodox ways of working with new ways of thinking and solving problems with AI as a tool. Because when the thinking changes, what gets built, how decisions get made, and even who does the work, all start to shift. And that's a very different kind of change. Because once the thinking shifts, the structures tend to follow. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please share and subscribe.